Our speaker tonight is Noah Wilson-Rich, and he is a behavioral ecologist. He got his degree at Tufts University, his doctorate, and he's also a graduate of the bee school at Essex County, Essex County Beekeepers Association. So he's got the real credentials, the PhD. It's the beekeeper credentials we want tonight. His company is the Best Bees Company, and they are a very unique entity that they install and manage honeybee hives for residents and for companies.
Thank you so much. What a great introduction. Who's that guy? What are you talking about? Thank you very much. Thank you for coming out tonight. What a storm, right? But we made it. We did it. So let's try to put our heads into a different type of storm, I guess. The springtime one, the flowers, and all these wonderful things that are coming down instead of the raindrops. I'd like to start in a little bit of a different way tonight, and this is perhaps already different because we're talking about insects. I mean, I'm not sure how many nights you really come to talks like this, but I'd like to start by thinking about how a bee sees the world. It's in a very different way from how we see the world, and it's kind of fun when I talk to school kids. I think about, let's look through the lens of the bee. Instead of all of these bright colors, bees see different colors. They see some things that we don't see, and we see things that they don't see. The world to humans is very hot, so we see reds. Bees do not see reds. We can see more yellow and orange and hot colors, and bees are more cool in what they see. So the spectrum in the world to bees is a much bluer one. It's much more purple in a way. And it's kind of fun to think about this because when you look at the flowers that bees are landing on, they tend to be blue. And it's going to really, I think, shift your perspective this spring. So just take a look at that, see what's happening, where the bees are going, and maybe how they're seeing the world. If the flower looks white to us, what does it look like to a bee? It might look blue, it might have all these different appearances. So, for example, on the right might be how we see a flower, and on the left might be how the bees see a flower. Very kind of hot for the people, very cool for the bees. Research has shown, by looking at bees, what types of wavelengths are coming into the bee eyes. And this is how we get some insight into what the world looks like through the bee's eyes. Do you know how many eyes bees have? This is already kind of crazy. I heard 2.
50.
I heard 6, 50. Any fives out there? It's 5. 5. Well, it's so weird to think about an odd number of eyes, right? That's what bees have. They have 2 compound eyes, so similar to us, but then they have 3 simple eyes, or ocelli as they're called, and those are kind of like the light and dark intake, kind of like the lens. So like we have the iris that can change, and these don't have that. So that's how they can see things that we used them to see. If there isn't enough light, they've got the help of 3 other simple eyes there. So we can see what wavelengths of light are coming into the bee's eyes to see what types of spectra the bees are looking at, and that relates to colors. You can look at an actual flower at the top, as we humans see it, this whole top row, it's just different colors of flowers. And then using the wavelengths of light that are being received by bees, you can make some inferences about what those flowers might look like to bees. So the middle row is kind of a false impression, a false image coloring of what those flowers might look like. But then the bottom row is actually with the patterning of the cells and the components of the bee eyes, what it might actually look like to a bee. Very weird, right? And something to draw off of that is maybe these hexagonal shapes start to appear. What is that relationship between bees and geometry? There's so much more work to be done. It's something that there's a teacher in Boston. You might think, oh, Harvard, MIT, Tufts. Fenway High School, Boston Public Schools. Benedette Manning is a math teacher, and she has a beehive in her classroom, and she works with the students to put the textbooks down, stop with the chalk, let's go to the beehive, and we'll look at shapes of the natural world. And they do computations to see, why is it a hexagon? Why isn't it a triangle or a square or a circle? And they look at the surface area to volume ratio of these shapes as they tessellate. I mean, it's amazing stuff. So I'm hoping to blow your minds from the get-go. Even if I haven't, I'll just keep it moving. So, other cool things about bees. I teach animal behavior at Simmons College here in Boston. It's an all-women's school. Bees are a female-dominated society. Simmons is another school that has bees on the campus. We had a student group this semester do a research project with the beehive, looking at recognition systems. Do they recognize all debris, or do they recognize things in the hive that could cause disease? And the students were putting junk in the hive, leaves and just debris. This is a research on a shoestring type study. And they were looking at the rates at which bees removed naturally associated dead bees and other things that could cause disease, so pieces of wax or the rotten parts, compared to the non-associated debris. And they just measured that rate of cleaning and removal, and they found that bees are naturally more associated with removing dead and diseased parts. They're very hygienic, as one might call it. And it's the females that do this. The males don't do much. It's a hot topic in biological science these days. What is the role of males? I devoted a chapter of my dissertation to this when I was a grad student, and I have to tell you, it was pretty inconclusive. They do a few things, but not as much as the females do. So that's something interesting. If you look at the genetics of the males, though, this is really where my students, I think, go, what did you just say? The genetics of bees are so fascinating in that males only have one set of chromosomes. I won't get too into the genetics here, but humans, we're diploid as we call it. We have two sets of chromosomes, one from mom, one from dad. Male bees only have one set of chromosomes. They don't have fathers. They're unfertilized eggs. If the queen lays an egg that's unfertilized, she stores sperm. She can choose whether or not to fertilize her egg with sperm. If it's not fertilized, it's a male. If it is fertilized, it's a female. So females have two sets of chromosomes. That's how a female bee is determined. Males have one set. Females have fathers. Males have no fathers. But they do have grandfathers. That's because the queen has a mother and a father. So males have one grandfather. I'll stop there. You can follow any other time. I love doing this stuff, so you've been warned. Now, about bees' diets and how this relates really to the Arnold Arboretum here, this is an amazing resource for residents in the greater Boston area, for Harvard University members who can really interact with the land here. Bees are vegan. About 100 million years ago, they split off from their carnivorous cousins, the wasps. Bees and wasps really used to be the same until flowering plants arose on Earth. And it's still a hot topic in research how flowers came to be. Around that time, 100 million years ago, bees diversified and pollinators diversified tremendously. It was this huge explosion of diversity on Earth, really matching these angiosperms, or these flowering plants, with pollinators, with the bees. So they're related to wasps, but they are not wasps. And that's what gives bees a bad name. Many people will say, oh, I got stung by a bee. Maybe you did. And whenever somebody says, I'm allergic to bees, I listen. Who am I to say, no, you're not. Bees aren't aggressive. I can certainly talk about bees, but I absolutely respect anybody who got stung by a bee and had a reaction. It's very real. However, wasp venom is much stronger than bee venom in most cases. Bees die when they sting, so their stings are barbed like an anchor, and when it goes in and the bees fly away, half of their bodies remain with whatever they just stung. So if you got stung by something and you see a stinger, maybe what looks like a splinter, that was a honeybee, most likely. If you got stung by something and you do not see a stinger, and it really, really hurts, that was most likely a yellow jacket, or a hornet, or a paper wasp, or something that wasn't a bee. It's a PR image. So one of the things I like to do is get out there and just try to talk to people about what is a bee, what is it, what's the role of bees. Bees are vegan, they go to flowers. They're just getting really two things for their diet: nectar for carbohydrates and pollen for protein. That's their balanced diet. That's it, that's what they eat. Wasps, they are also meat eaters, so they will go out and eat some larvae or other types of pests, maybe even mosquitoes in some cases. So they're beneficial in their own way, but bees are really great for the role as pollinators. They're visiting so many different crops, over 100 different fruit and vegetable crops, what the bees are contributing for the role as pollinators. The last sciencey thing, get the learning out of the way here, is that bees are also really fascinating when talking about evolution. I teach an intro to evolution class at Northeastern University, and one of the things we're always talking about is nature versus nurture, and what's the role of genes versus the environment. Usually it's both, so we call this a fallacy in a way. However, with bees, what makes a queen bee live for years rather than just a month or so for the worker bees? They are genetically the same. It's only an environmental difference. It's a diet difference. When a queen bee is a larva, a little egg, she's fed a different diet for a few days more, maybe 5, 6, 7, maybe up to 9 extra days of royal jelly. Royal jelly is this white substance. It's very rich in proteins, and it helps her reproductive organs develop. And she lives for maybe 3, 4, 5 years. This one little insect living for years, storing sperm for her whole life, while her genetically identical sisters live for a month, and they can't mate. So it's really fascinating to look at behavior, evolution, and get a lot of information from bees. So that's what takes us back to our original slide here. At this point, I would like to acknowledge that bees are dying. It's depressing. Sometimes I feel like I just want to get up and dance and make the mood a little bit lighter when we talk about this. But it's true, and they're dying from a lot of different causes. Habitat loss, there's aren't enough flowers out there. Pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, chemicals in general, perhaps there's synergistic effects when they're combining, they're killing bees together. We don't really understand the mechanisms that are just yet. And then the third leading hypothesis, as we could call it, for what's killing our bees are diseases. Bees get so many different diseases, just like people do. They get bacterial infections, fungal infections, viral, arthropod, and you name it, the bees can get it. So those are the 3 leading things killing our bees. I'd like to ask of the audience a little bit about what you might want to hear about tonight. So I've introduced myself a little bit already. I would like to know if there are any special requests, because I can jump a little bit, or I can just kind of keep going in the direction of where the future might take us in our role with bees, how we can help them, and what might happen. So I ask of you what requests you have.
So as a small residential beekeeper with a few hives, this year was a very interested person to know other people who heard we had as well. We didn't have great success over the summer. Dry summer with nectar, and we had high loads. So any observation in your hive as you travel around the East Coast, similar situation, and what would we have?
Sure. So request for kind of a disease update?
Right, disease management.
Sure. Disease management. Yeah.
I'd like to have hives, but I don't know if I'm gardening. But I have a garden and I grow vegetables, a few vegetables, and I'm interested in attracting bees with flowers.
Great. So kind of a gardener's perspective on how to get more bees. Good.
To save them.
To save them. Absolutely protect them. Yes.
So as a designer who has an environmental responsibility, it sounds to me like habitat loss and chemicals and environment are 2 things that we as individuals and as gardeners and as homeowners can do to help.
Yes.
We can't do anything with that disease. But I would be interested in just getting some concrete suggestions for what I can encourage my clients to do.
Great. So gardeners and designers' perspective on how to
Yes.
help our bees. Yes.
So could you also talk about if there's a benefit to planting native plants for what belongs in this area?
Sure. So what to plant? Native versus invasive versus everything between.
Versus hybrid.
Versus hybrid. Absolutely. Yes.
Are you going to talk about the life cycle of bees at all?
I'm not, but I can. So
So brief.
absolutely. Yeah. Brief life cycle. A little bit more biology. Yeah.
I'd like to hear some about, she was talking about using native plants versus non-native plants, where we get our plant material from, and neonates, and how those affect bees and bee populations, and how we source our plants better.
Sure. So not just what to plant and how to plant it, but where we get it from. We do my best. Yeah.
It's sort of a question about urban design.
Yes.
Are there factors that have
arisen that mitigated against putting beehives, say, I'll move that have to do with town and city regulations?
Sure, so the influence of policymakers on our ability to help our bees. Yes.
Maybe something about native pollinators versus other species that are being brought in?
Excellent. Sure, so about the other 19,999 or so bee species. We can get to that as well. A couple more, yes?
I'm interested in the navigational techniques of bees, kind of some of their wayfinding strategies, how they locate the organizational structure of the hive.
Sure, maybe I can even dance the answer to you. Sure, okay, so navigation. Two more, yeah?
I'd be interested in hearing more about the problem itself, how severe it is, what the trends are looking like now, what the projections are.
Sure. So we can address some of that as well when we're talking about diseases. Yes.
If you wanted to have, say, lavender honey, would you have to have a huge field of lavender and keep your bees right in the middle of it? Okay.
Sure. And that is not a yes answer, that's a no answer. It's like not in my head this way. Yes?
What can bees see in the dark?
What can we see?
They're inside the hive.
Okay. So these senses and recognition, this is great. So all of these are actually detailed in the book. And I'm not saying I apply my book, but I'm saying we have a limited time for the talk. And it's so great that you guys shared these requests with me, and I will try my best to answer all of them here. But if I don't, the book, which is the Bee in Natural History, is a download of my brain. It is something that was a great opportunity presented to me after I gave my first TED Talk in 2012 called Every City Needs Healthy Honeybees. In that TED Talk, I presented data showing that bees in the cities of Boston and Cambridge produce more honey than bees outside of the cities. But I also survived the winter at higher rates than bees outside of the cities. It's very counterintuitive. And as a scientist, my training is really just to speak on the data. What do the data show? And then once we talk about the data, the rest is kind of out there. I'm not one to get on a soapbox and say, here's how to interpret the data. Just kind of put it out there, and I'm really open to any thoughts you might have. So that's where much of these thoughts started from. And around the same time as that TED Talk opportunity came some more publicity about just how my laboratory was operating. So I'm a product of that economy, one could say. I graduated from Tufts in 2011 and defended my dissertation in 2010. So tough economy, thinking, how am I going to fund this research? The lab I was in had never received a grant. It still has never received a grant to this day. I continue to apply for grants. This is my 10th year in a row of National Science Foundation rejections, and I wear that badge with a lot of pride. Going for 11 and 12 and so on. We will just keep trying. But in the meantime, we sell beehives. This is what I did on Facebook. And in 2009, I got this idea. Why don't I just think outside the box, and we're just going to start providing beekeeping services to get some research funding. It's like anybody can do this. At the Arboretum, maybe you can provide some landscaping services, or I don't know. It's just any researcher who knows something, just find a way to get people to help you out with it in exchange for that information. So it was a crazy idea. I didn't think it was going to work, and then it kind of did. And I started a Facebook page for free. Science Magazine wrote an article in their careers section about how one researcher was being innovative in a tough grant funding environment. It was really strange to me, but that's kind of just how life happens, isn't it? So, we have an actual team now. I started this company in my living room, and I was coming into problems when chemical distribution companies would not send me reagents to do my experiments, testing vaccines for honeybees, testing how their immune system works, because it was a residential address. I was thinking, it's just ethanol. I can go get some vodka. This isn't high-tech stuff here. It was fishing wire that I would use for implants and then some sterilizing solution. Anyway, now we have a team of researchers, and we work with beekeepers. For any beekeepers in the audience, if you have any bees that you would like for us to take a look at and see if they are infected with any virus, fungus, mites, we can do this service for free. So it's wonderful that we're able to give back to the community in that way. We also work with cities and towns here. So one request was to talk about how beekeeping relates to policymakers And we work with municipalities so that we can collect swarms of bees. This is typically a springtime event. So this happened 2 years ago in Dorchester, not far from here. This is a swarm of bees about 3 times as large as I had ever seen before. And they're not aggressive. They're a little bit startling, right? But they're safe. I tried telling this to everybody. People didn't really believe me. But the cops at the scene, there were also media and townspeople came out. Cops had pulled me aside and they said, "Is there a decomp in the car?" I said, what's a decomp? And they said, "A decomposing body." I said, "I don't think bees are any more attracted to a decomposing body than we are. They probably think it's a big daisy. I mean, it's a yellow paper." So anyway, that's something that was very dramatic. When we opened up the trunk after I removed the bees, there was just a folded down baby carriage in there. It was the anticlimax of the century. We were able to bring all these bees back to the bee sanctuary, which is a fancy name for our parking lot, and then make sure they were healthy. We actually split that hive into 4 hives, and we sold each of those off to businesses, families around the area, and that generated more funding for our research. So it's all kind of just make it up as we go. But with policymakers, I do believe that they all have good intentions in mind. We'll get to more specific policies in the future slides here coming up, but it's been a challenge, and often policymakers don't want to have to be too vocal about their decisions because it's a slow evolving process. Another view of the bee sanctuary here is really from above. These are car elevator lifts. These are hydraulic lifts that help us raise the beehives overhead when we're not using them, and then we lower them down when we want to work the hives. So it's kind of a weird, innovative solution. These are the bees on the Intercontinental Hotel rooftop. So they have a restaurant called Miel in the building of the Intercontinental, so they actually use their honey for food in the restaurant. So then we have a residential property in the south end as well that has the beehive overhead, kind of a floating design to keep it safely out of reach from Ahab here. So Boston is very much in favor of bees. There is Article 89 that's recently gone through. These are guidelines for urban beekeeping. Somerville, Brookline, and some other towns also have recommendations here too. There's no statewide permit. It's been tried and not been successful in the past. Because it's kind of a get off my property attitude in Massachusetts. It's kind of a uniquely local perspective. I also want to share with you a bit more about the staff too. Kelly Allen is my first student who I published with. She was a full-time co-op from Northeastern University, so she's the second author on this book as well. The future, at least for the lab and for the company, is very bright. But for bees, it remains a bit more opaque. And as we heard from many of you in the audience, the challenges with beekeeping this year and for many prior years has been so difficult. We'll get into that now. There have been reports of losses of beehives of up to 100% of bees dead on a property at a time. This really started in 2006 in Pennsylvania. There were mass bee die-offs, mostly associated with apple crops in those areas. Apple crops usually are associated with fungicide use as well because of fungal infections that apple crops can have. And recent data from Jeff Pettis and colleagues in a publication from last year in a journal called PLOS One, called the Library of Science. PLOS is such a great word. They showed there was an association between fungicide use and nosema infection. Nosema is one of the killers of bees these days. It's a fungal infection of the gut. And this is something we saw in 100% of the hives that we tested last year, 2013. We tested about 200 hives in Massachusetts. Every single hive had it. We confirmed our results with a laboratory at Penn State University using PCR techniques. And that was a big problem. This year, we're finding it isn't 100% of death and infection rates. I want to point out where the infection rates have been highest. And it's not in the backyard, really local beekeeping hobbyist operations. It's in the large-scale migratory beekeeping operations. This is actually where most of America's honeybees live, on flatbed trucks and highways, not in permanent locations in our backyards. Over 1.5 million bees are in this circuit. They start really overwintering somewhere down south, let's say Louisiana, where the weather's warm, the winters are not harsh. And then once the first blooms of these big monoculture crops need pollinating, the bees are up to California on flatbed trucks on our nation's highways. And they will pollinate almonds really around the month of March in California. February to March here. Nothing else pollinates almonds than honeybees. Nothing. Every almond you eat is the fruit that comes from a honeybee that touched that flower. Those blossoms fall off from the almond trees in mid-March. There's no other food for the bees to eat there because all of the blossoms are gone, and these are monoculture crops. Nothing else is growing, everything else has been ripped up. So the bees hit the road again. They have to go. And they come to the northeast, really. They follow the pollination circuit. So they'll go to Pennsylvania to pollinate the apples, Maine for the blueberries, Massachusetts for the cranberries, New Jersey, Florida, back to Louisiana. This is really the state of our bees, and it's been these large-scale migratory beekeeping operations, often multi-generational within the same family. These have been associated with disease, with most diseases, with colony collapse disorder. And that's something that is associated with disappearing bees, not just dead bees, but vanished. So it's like, I say a CSI bee, in a way, you know? That's what made the mainstream media in 2007. There was an article in the New York Times that showed, hey guys, everybody needs to listen because bees are vanishing. It's really weird. We're not just finding dead bodies. Today, the rates of death have decreased. It seems to have stabilized a bit. So we're still losing about a third of our bees every year. It's still an unacceptably high number of bee deaths, but at least it's not 100%. And it's something that isn't really associated, perhaps, with colony collapse disorder anymore. In September, I wrote a piece for the New York Times that reported kind of rumors that I had been hearing at government conferences with other academic researchers. For 3 years, we haven't seen a case of colony collapse disorder in the United States. People don't seem to know this, and people think that, oh, if CCD is better, then everything's fine, right? It's not right, because this number is the death rate of all of the bees every year. It's a problem. This year, in Massachusetts, we haven't seen the same rates of infection. So across the 350 beehives that I oversee, some of them had nosema, some of them had varroa mites, but it wasn't 100%. That's just from our samples across 5 states. It doesn't mean that if your hives have infection that you're doing anything wrong. Other research projects that we've done looked at overwintering success. What do beekeepers do to help the bees over the winter? Some beekeepers wrap their beehives with all sorts of materials. Some medicate their hives using chemicals. Some use organic approaches. Some feed their bees. Our research has shown for multiple years that no matter what the beekeeper does, it doesn't matter. There's no association between doing anything and overwintering survival as far as our data have shown. What does that mean? Well, to get up on the soapbox that I said I wouldn't get up on, it's just that you need to keep going. If your bees die, it wasn't you. You need to just keep working at it. You need to repopulate the hives, and you need to keep thinking about where you're getting these from. Are they matched up with this environment or not? Yeah.
So when you're talking about these problems, are you specifically only talking about imported honeybees and not about all the others?
Right now we're talking about, imported honeybees, one would say. And this is great because now with the future of bees, it has to be less reliant on honeybees. Honeybees are not native to the Americas. Honeybees are 1 out of 20,000 or so different species of bees, of which 4,000 bees species are native to the Americas. Honeybees are not one of them. They just happen to be 2 million honeybee hives here that we brought over. I want to share with you a little bit now, thinking about all bees. Now, honeybees are very important because they pollinate so many of our crops. They contribute really 2.4 million hives total to all of our pollination processes across the country. But they also contribute economically. Over $14 billion a year to the US economy and $100 billion a year to the global economy. So they're not just important for everyday eating here, they're also important for how the economy works around the globe. They're ecologically and economically sustainable in that way. We have to think about them from both perspectives. On an everyday note here, just to show you a couple photos of how our lives could be impacted with fewer bees. Here's kind of what we might regularly eat for lunch, for breakfast here. Colorful, healthy foods. In a world without bees, we'll still have food. It just will be a bit more carby, as we say, or brown, in a way. It won't be as nutritious. So again, a world with bees and a world without bees. I think you're pretty convinced as to how we need bees here. So I won't try to overdo it too much, but what I will do is bring it back to the policymakers. This is something that has really taken off and people are noticing it because not just of the backyard beekeeper being a nuisance, but because bees are dying and we need them. So we have our first beekeeper in the White House. We have, and actually just to go back, here's the beehive right here. I just scheduled today a talk at the U.S. Botanical Gardens for April 17th. And I want to try to donate a very beautiful kind of flag-inspired beehive to the White House, so I'll keep you updated. We have companies too that are taking off and noticing how bees are very easy to incorporate into the urban fabric, as one could say. So the headquarters of NPR and of National Geographic have bees on our corporate rooftops. We have many, many beehives on rooftops throughout Boston, Cambridge, New England, and New York. Intercontinental Times Square has multiple beehives. One would never notice this because they're going to the flowers. They're not attacking people. So these are non-aggressive bees, as we tend to say. I want to go into a little bit more about the policy here. When we look at other examples, France has always been a leader in their beekeeping policies. They've encouraged their residents by using some incentives to get more bees out there. It's something to take notice of, because we have contrasts here, and we're thinking about places like Palm Springs, where it's a $2,000 fee to get a permit for one beehive on your property. So that would be the opposite, with a disincentive. Only the wealthiest can have pollinators in Palm Springs. Hopefully they will change that. We can think about places like Nairobi in Kenya, where I had the opportunity to go with a nonprofit group. The name for which some people get upset by, but it's called Bees Without Borders. I did not name that. But I got to work with local tribes, the Samburu tribes. I got to see their research operations in Nairobi, and they're teaching the masses how to build beehives, how to harvest honey, how to do this. And they're selling products in a gift shop at the laboratory, like honey and propolis and wax and all these great things that bees make to help fund their research operation. It was great to see that others are doing something similar. That's a great example from Nairobi, but if you contrast that with places like Miami, or even recently Cambridge, Massachusetts, where there was recently a cease and desist order at a children's school for using bees in their educational program, we have too many cases where residents are being brought to court or being served with orders for having bees. So that's a problem. The last compare-contrast example I'll give you is looking at Australia, where they have wonderful bees, such as this domino cuckoo bee, which we haven't seen here because it lives in Australia. They have no bumblebees in Australia. Did you know that? If you see a bumblebee there, you must call the authorities. It's an escaped convict. It's a big deal. They also have no varroa mites. Varroa mites are a huge disease of honeybees in America and around the world, not in Australia. They have a network of universities combining their research resources to conduct really high-quality research on bees. Contrast that with Los Angeles. Not only is the practice of beekeeping illegal, but if you see bees, you must kill them. You have to eradicate beehives. So it's a murder policy there. We need to change this. And policymakers are doing that. In Los Angeles, bees were made illegal in the 1800s because people thought that bees attacked fruit. So more bees, less food. And of course, that's the opposite. In 1917, the LA Times published a paper saying we need to repeal this outdated law. 100 years later, we are still befuddled as to why this outdated law has not been repealed, so policymakers are working on that. So this is really what's happening, and I think we just need to take this piecemeal approach. While people are figuring out the honeybee aspect of it, it's so important to move that conversation forward. And that's really what I'm hoping to do tonight, and that's what the book was really pushing towards. Acknowledging all bees. These are some data that were published in that paper I referred to from Jeff Pettis and colleagues last year. It looked at the amount of pollen from beehives as it relates to the crop in the field where the hives were. Farmers are paying money to rent beehives temporarily off of that migratory beekeeping circuit to pollinate the crops that they're growing. This project looked to see if bees are going to the crops that they're being paid to go to. The bees aren't really getting paid, but the beekeepers are. And the higher the bar shows the tighter that correlation, the amount of pollen from the crop that was found in that beehive. So beehives that were in almond and apple crops were going to apples and almonds. Beehives from all the other crops were not going to those flowers. And that includes blueberries, cranberries, watermelons, pumpkins, cucumbers, the list goes on. It's a problem, and we need to pay attention to this. This was just a chart in the paper that wasn't even the focus of the paper. It was one of those moments when I was reading, and I looked at this and I said, wait, what? Why is nobody talking about this? So I'm talking about this, and I'm letting you know about this. There are other things pollinating these crops. It's not to say we don't have our blueberries and cranberries. We have these things. But farmers are paying good money for honeybees to get off of a flatbed truck for a month when the bees are not doing too well up there as it is, and the bees don't even want to go to those crops. There's such a mismatch here, and we need to start talking about it and acknowledging it, because farmers could save money. And if we could find ways to promote the other bee species that are pollinating those crops, we could help those bees by giving them more opportunities to get forage or habitat, and we could increase the crop while making the operation more profitable. That's how we do it. I want to advance this a little bit more to what's in this for each of you. How can you help non-honeybee species? Many of you are beekeepers, designers, gardeners. I think it's amazing, and you can continue these practices by thinking about not just honeybees, but all bees. I want to go back to that idea of the car with the swarm on it, that yellow car, but here you see a swarm in a tree. It's a little bit hard to see with the darker image here, but this is kind of a natural picture where bees' natural habitat is. We have honeybees that live in trees, but we have some ground nesting bees. We have bees that live in crevices here. Have you seen images of bees living in walls? It's kind of crazy. You see articles that say 50,000 bees removed from a woman's wall, emergency. What if we could keep the bees there? Or even better, if we could design homes for the future for the purpose of having bees living in the walls? It's crazy, I know. But let me explain it a bit more. Bees can keep the walls, they keep their nest about 90 degrees or more in the wintertime. And they cool the hives in the summertime when they're too hot. So it's insulation. How much money do we spend on insulation every year? Maybe we didn't have to do that. What if you could pipe water through these living walls, and then that warm water could go throughout the house, warm the floors? See what I'm getting at? It's a bit crazy, but I think that the future can be better if we think about how we can live together with bees here, in the environment that they're already living in. What if you even had ways to design or landscape with these living architectural pieces in mind? Living furniture. This is a table, but it's also a beehive. There's an entrance on my side of the picture here, just a little slit where the bees can come and go. You can point that away from where people are and have a chair on either side, and that's a cocktail table. And that's also my front porch of where I live in Boston. So we have a cocktail table beehive. They're not aggressive. It's just a little weird, right? It's a little strange, and I get it. But these bees are not lost. They're not going to your sticky drinks or to your food. We have clients who have a grill, and they have one table next to the grill that's a beehive, and they move their cooked meats and vegetables from the grill right out to the beehive. And they loved it so much that they, this year, just got a second one. So they have a living table on both sides. It's functional, it's pollinators. It seems to make sense, to me at least, but I'm a bit of a crazy person, I suppose. The non-honeybee species can be helped in the easiest of ways. And you can do this with family, you can do this with kids, you can have a date night where you have extra wine corks laying around that you want to arrange in a bucket. There's no wrong way to do this, but you repurpose trash or debris into a creative kind of collage way. You just get artistic with it, and then you set it outside, and you let native bees move in. With all the other species of bees, it really is much more of a set it and forget it mentality to it. You don't have to check on them because many of them are solitary. They just need a little crevice or a little thing to drill into, or little holes here. Bumblebees like to nest underground. We've got mason bees, leafcutter bees, such as what made it at the very top of this beautiful nest made out of leaf petals, not even leaves, with flower petals that are then glued together with a sticky mixture of pollen and nectar as glue. That's their house. Isn't that beautiful? That's something that you might find in a bee hotel that you could make here. All these other bees that we don't even notice that are living right under our noses in our gardens and our properties, like these iridescent green bees. solitary bees. There's much more to discover, and there are thousands of bees living amongst us that we don't even know about. So that really is the future of trying to help get more pollinators out there, and what the bee topic is all about. It's so much more than honeybees. There are opportunities for businesses to take advantage, really, of this idea. The St. Ermin's Hotel in London, which I haven't had the good fortune to visit just yet, but we can take a field trip now, has on the rooftop a bee hotel and a human hotel. It's all this beautifully designed habitat for bees. So you can go and approach it, they're not going to attack, but you can see what's moved in. And it's really beautifully painted purple here in a way. Anybody can do this stuff. We're having an event next summer in Faneuil Hall, or in talks at least, with the Design Museum in Boston, to do a family day event, creating bee hotels. You can get old shoe boxes and you can drill holes in them, put some padding or grass, and paint them different colors, thinking about the colors that bees see, for example. And you can have fun and do some creative design and citizen science at the same time. You set it, and then a few months later, you can come back, take a peek in, see if it was successful, if anything moved in, see if there are any designs that the bees liked, and then maybe focus on those for the next year. And it's pretty much free. We like that stuff. Other cultures are doing this already. In Bhutan, here's a beautiful photo of a temple where there is a big beehive living outside, and that's okay. We let them live there. We can learn a lot. What if homes of the future were then designed with pollinators in mind? So not just in the walls, but as the walls. If we could have some type of a structure like this, or even if we're thinking about landscape design, you can have really creative kind of talking centers or tables around the land that are designed by repurposing essentially old, unused things, but in a beautiful way, such as this table. And these are areas where bees and native pollinators can move in on their own, and you don't need to do anything to it. You just kind of set it and forget it. And even going further, if we want to do some planning in advance for what a home of the future could look like, we might take a page from the social bees home, and that's something where we could live as well. So that's really a little bit about what we look at, and I want to address the point here too, with all of these different bee species, it's really hard to know, if we plant clover, that's what the bees are going to love. Bees do love clover, but they love native plants just as much as they love invasive plants, and that was something that one of you had said before. They're not particular, so when we're thinking about what to plant, of course we want to be conscientious as to where things are coming from. Is this organic, is it not, if that's important to you. If you are thinking about pulling weeds, you might want to think twice, because weeds actually create a lot of habitat. We have one client in Brookline who has an organized chaos side yard, as I call it. She has a fenced off, do not mow portion. And anything that wants to grow there, will grow there. And it's amazing to see the biodiversity of all the little insects that like to thrive in that area. So that's one way where you can let the weeds go. The milkweed, which butterflies also love in addition to bees. You can think about many things when planting a bee-friendly garden. But the main thing I want you to know is that it really depends on what's in bloom at different months of the year. That's the most important thing, extending the bloom season on your property. Bees can fly for miles, so you don't have to put them right on top of the flowers. They will find them. Even if you live in the city and you don't have a garden right on your property, the bees seem to be doing just fine by finding the community gardens with the diverse flowers there. And maybe there's a benefit to urban beekeeping, perhaps, if there are lower amounts of chemicals, such as pesticides, fungicides, herbicides in the cities, not agricultural areas. So those are the things to consider with planting and designing. Extending the bloom. If you want more information about what bees like, that's in bloom in March, April, May, and so forth, send me an email. I've got some cards at the back, or info@bestbees.com. I will send you an Excel spreadsheet that was put together from the University of Massachusetts by Professor Shaw from 1952. And he collected information with his colleagues, I'm presuming. I didn't know him personally, unfortunately. But it's about a 12-page spreadsheet that you printed out. So that's why I tend to email it. But it's separated by month of year during which the plants bloom. And some of them have the nectar content and the pollen content and the scientific name and the common name, and if it's native or invasive. So it's a lot of information. I'm happy to share that freely with anybody who wants that. So don't hesitate to contact me. Question?
I was just wondering, what the ratio was between talking about flowers, but trees. I mean, the trees are just gigantic.
Bees love trees. So they're kind of like a whole acre of flowers in one tree. Things like so. Absolutely. And the urban settings, people tend to plant flowering trees rather than so you get a diverse amount rather than in nature. You can actually just get rid of the forest as well. You tend to have, we know how other varieties. So just one of the reasons why it might be better in an urban environment. Yes, it's such a great point. Trees give a great bang for your buck. Thinking about all of the blooms, there is the tree of 40 fruits. Anybody has heard of? Where there's some wonderful grafting that occurred in New York State, and I'm forgetting the fellow's name, but you can easily find it online here, that grafted all these different stone fruits. So that's one tree that has 40 different flowers that will create 40 different fruits. It's amazing. Bees love trees as much as they love annuals, perennials, and herbaceous plants, all different sorts. Yes?
Bulbs? Nobody seems to ever talk about bulbs.
There are bulbs on the list,
Okay.
so I'm happy to share that with you. Yeah, there's a lot there. So I'm going to just kind of round out my presented slides here with something that I hope will really blow your minds open a little bit more as we think about the future with bees. We know that bees are important, right? I believe that you know this. We know that bees are dying. I think that we can save them. Many of you here know about what you can do. You can plant many different things. Even if you're not able to help with the disease part, that's what the researchers are doing. So that's what I'm doing. Really, my PhD is in honeybee immunology. There are many other researchers doing this. Yes, funding is severely lacking, but hopefully that will change. One thing that's happening with research with bees is looking at how we can train bees to help and work a little bit harder than they already are. Might not seem like it's the best thing. Maybe bees are already overworked as it is. But if we have fewer bees that are pollinating certain crops, maybe other bees can be trained to catch up and pollinate what some bees are not doing. You can train a bee by doing what Pavlov did with his dog experiments. So you associate a food reward with an odor. So with Pavlov, he had a dog and associated a bell with his bone, if you remember all these studies. So you can do that with a bee, just like this. And what you do is you associate an odor with a food reward, so the bee will stick her tongue out. The mouth part of bees is like a straw. It's proboscis. It's really two organs that come together and then they make a straw. So they will suck up the food odor. So that when you remove the food odor in the presence of the actual odor that you're training the bee to, she sticks out her tongue. So tongue is in, tongue is out. Got it? It's like the dog salivating. Here's kind of the setup. So you have a bee that is restrained. You can actually anesthetize a bee so that she's comfortable when setting her up here. I mean, whatever a bee being comfortable might be. But you can put a bee to sleep by putting her in the refrigerator or on ice for a few minutes. And she falls asleep. Be sure to take her off. She'll wake up in an experience. But you're associating an odor with sugar water. So maybe this is a floor odor that's, let's say, almonds, and this might not be a honey, even though it is a honey picture. And then here, eventually, when you take the food source away and just have that odor of, let's say, almonds, her tongue is out. Again, her, because males don't do much. You can then send the bees out to go to that odor because they think food is there. And that changes the bee's behavior. You can track bees by putting a little radar or other device here so you can see where they're going. Also, these data show us that if you train a bee 3 times instead of training her once, she remembers that odor more over 72 hours. It's kind of like me. I need to learn things a few times. Like, teach it to me 3 times instead of just 1 and then I got it. Same thing with bees. Same train it 3 times. You guys are experts. So for example, again, this is not a honeybee, but these are almond flowers. So you can train other bees to go to other non-associated flowers. Not too crazy, right? What if you change that odor up to something that was not just a flower, but let's say a bomb? Pretty crazy. This can actually come very much in handy with bomb-sniffing bees in a way, because you then have the bees that go out to the fields. And if they go to an area on a field and they're hovering over it, there's probably a landmine there. And what do we do today to cure landmines? To clear them. We send a person out, a dog. It's tough. These are things that we can improve upon. Perhaps we can send bees there. They just told us where a landmine is. We don't clear it, and the bees don't leave today. What if we don't send the bees out afterwards? What if we keep them in some kind of a handheld, like a dustbuster like device? And then we scan, let's say, luggage for an associated scent, and the bees stick their tongues out at a piece of luggage in an airport. And there are 97 out of 100 bees sticking their tongues out of this bag. You might want to check that bag for a bomb, right? 97% accuracy. Right now we have, again, dogs, maybe, or other machines. Sometimes they could miss things. If the dog gets a sample size of 1, it's hard to get that same accuracy. And what's best, too, is that these bees, again, can then just go home after their workday. Seems a little futuristic, a little Star Wars here with drones, but drones are boys, and girls, so it's a bit different here. So I want to just think about other applications here as I show you these last slides and then take your questions. We have other uses for bees in slums of the world, such as in Mumbai. We can bring these devices to people in cities where they don't have access to health care, and it's already being used in treating diabetes, so people can test their sugar levels by blowing into a device, and by looking at how many bees will stick their tongues out, you can get an indication of if there's a diabetic incident that is happening or if that sugar level is all right. That's something that doesn't cost much money, and it's something that can be hugely impactful to improve the human condition. Even for parts of the developed world and the slums alike, you can think about how bees might be able to cure other things, such as cancer. These are all things that are already happening. If a person breathes into a device such as this, and there's some association with a cancer odor, bees have that same response, or they would be attracted to it, or a certain number of bees, and that could give an indication as to whether other tests should be developed. It's really important when places don't have access to healthcare, access to money to fund it. Very preliminary ways that we can improve our future and the future of bees at the same time for a very low cost, really, just with a bit of a different understanding. So this is the last slide I want to leave you with, just to think about the implications of what a future with bees might look like. I love that you're here tonight despite the storm, and that you have all these questions too. So thank you for coming, and I want to answer any other questions you might have. Ooh.
When you were in Africa with Bees Without Borders,
Yes.
what kind of bees were they using?
So in Africa, I really wanted to go for many reasons, but for one reason was that I would always say, oh, these are not aggressive. I wanted to know what the aggressive bees were like. And around here in New England, we typically will work with Italian honeybees, or Russian honeybees, or Carnelian, or a few other varieties, but we don't work with any aggressive ones, or African or Africanized honeybees, because those are tropical bees. They don't survive above the frost line. So winter, one small benefit to it, I suppose, is that it's nature's reset button in a way. It really kills out many aggressive invasive species. So I was realizing that those bees, I didn't get stung. The mean people in our group got stung, which is funny. But they do swarm more frequently. They're on the run. And really, you think about aggression and the tropics in the sense of predators. Predators ate the nice bees a long time ago in evolutionary history. So these days, we're really left with bees that can defend themselves quite well. They're also on the run much more frequently. So bees in Africa tend to swarm, like that yellow car. They also produce a bit less honey because they're on the run and they don't have that winter season to save up food for. That's why bees are making their honey here in New England, at least, because that's what they eat in the wintertime. They don't hibernate. They're kind of like people. They'll stay inside and they cuddle for warmth, and they eat honey for food. And then they just kind of wait for a warm day. That's when they go outside to go to the bathroom. But the bees there, for the most part, I didn't experience the aggression that many people talk about. There's also different strains or races or subspecies of honeybees, such as the mountain bee in Nairobi, which is very docile, lives at the higher elevations. They have stingless bees in Tanzania. At first, many people in our group said, oh, great, awesome, these bees don't sting. They bite. So one section in chapter 6 of the book, it's called the Bee Directory. The book is kind of like a coffee table book. Every time you turn the page, it's a different topic. Chapter 6 is really the different species you might find in the backyard or around the world. And there's a section of the stingless bees, which is really cool. There's some of them in Mexico as well, and a bit further south. Yeah.
So I can understand how bees can maybe raise the temperature inside of their hive by beating their wings and like raising their metabolic activity, creating body heat. How do they lower the temperature, lower them the heat that's outside?
So yeah, raising their temperature is related to contracting their wing muscles, kind of like shivering. So they're not actually moving their wings as much as just kind of cuddling hardcore. Now for cooling, they do move their wings. They create an air current. Termites do this too. All of these social animals, it's really what fascinates me, and how as a social group they can resist disease. They don't want to keep it too cool because then there could be fungal outbreaks. They don't want to get it too hot because there could be developmental, I'm trying to not say disorders, but you know, you get it. The developmental errors can happen there. So it has to be a good temperature maintained. And they create this air current by facing away from the entrance of the hive, and they essentially push the hot air out. And it's called fanning. Yeah. There's also a behavior called heat shielding that Phil Starks in my lab at Tufts, not my lab, but where I went to grad school, he looked at this behavior of heat shielding when there's a big heat source, or presumably even a cold source that hasn't been tested yet. But their bees, they don't self-sacrifice, but they block that heat or cool area, and then they can move away. So they're kind of really working as a group to regulate the temperature in a number of ways. Yeah.
Are bees dying at the same rate all over the world?
These are not dying at the same rate all over the world. We tend to see at least colony collapse disorder as mass bee die-offs associated with more developed parts of the world. The first TED Talk in 2012 showed a timeline of how this isn't the first time for mass bee die-offs in human history, at least. It's happened from at least since the 900s in the United Kingdom, Ireland area, and more temperate areas have experienced bee die-offs. Mostly honeybees. We still don't know so much about the other species of bees. Bumblebees seem to be dying off, but we really don't know too much about them. And then our solitary bee species, we hardly know anything. So is there a correlation between pesticide use and mass bee die-offs? And that's one thing that's led to much confusion as to what's causing the bee die-offs. There are data out there that show a link between neonicotinoid pesticides, for example, and colony collapse disorder. Much of that was published by Alex Liu at the Harvard School of Public Health. He had at least 2 publications that showed this, and then there were questions about the publications, and as with any scientist, and we think, okay, how can we revise and repeat and keep working on it? But it's controversial research to look at any pesticides' negative effect on the environment. In Europe, governments and policymakers can just take products off the shelves and say, we're not selling this anymore, we're going to take a few years off and see how the bee populations recover. And they seem to have improved. In the United States, companies can sell products with a conditional approval, meaning we promise to test on bees in the environment. Sometimes it doesn't always happen. We can't take things off so easily. So the data remain elusive. Yes?
So what's California's problem? They generally are ahead environmentally and things coming from California in this direction. Why are they so backward about bees?
So California is a huge agricultural state, and it is something that is near and dear to their identities. The almond crops that supply the United States and much of the world with almonds only come from California, and a few counties in California at that. So this is big industry, highly concentrated monoculture crops. And what we're working on doing, we as collective group of humans, is trying to at least encourage growers to plant wildflowers along the edges or on central rows amongst the other crops to get some more forage in there. A balanced diet has been shown to be good for the bee's immune system. Just like with people, if we eat pizza every day, albeit delicious, it probably won't be that healthy. Same thing with bees. A varied diet, varied pollen sources is better. The Obama administration just contributed over $50 million to planting wildflower seeds in 5 northern Midwestern states. I think as a trial program, or maybe because their grants were written better. I don't know. But that's where they went, and good for them. I think it's great. Many bees are producing honey in those states, and that's really one of the big contributors too. But the National Almond Board, National Honey Board are big lobby organizations for their interests. They work together because they're so closely tied with honeybees. University of California at Davis is also a big research center too. Northern California seems to be a bit more ahead of the game than Southern California, but the bees are a bit less aggressive there too, and that might have been contributing to why policies are a bit different still. These are all speculations that I've been trained to not give.
Just as a comment, don't bees, since California is such a huge agricultural area, don't bees pollinate other crops, other California crops besides almonds?
Absolutely, yes. So bees pollinate over 100 different fruit vegetable crops. However, almonds are so unique in that only honeybees pollinate almonds. So these two species are co-evolved, one might say. They really need one another. Now, honeybees can pollinate other things too, so they're more generalists. And so other growers have an interest in our bees, even if maybe it's not fully realized yet. Yes?
Can you describe the transport of the bees going to pollinate the big monocultures in the West and then moving back and stuff? Does that happen in other parts of the world too, or is it a place where they do that?
You know, the migratory beekeeping operation is nothing new, and it really took off starting in the 1950s, and that's really when it's grown exponentially to today in the United States. If we go back to when the first societies were really building in Egypt, when agriculture was taking off along the River Nile, that's when we really had our first migratory beekeeping operations. Beekeepers would transport bees along on rafts down the river to pollinate the crops. So it's actually how we started in a way. Before that operation, we really were collecting honey as honey hunters. There are cave drawings from Spain that kind of reflect this idea of humans' fascination with getting honey from bees and trees. And then we have, really as agriculture was growing, Persian cultures started to sell honey in a centralized location. So there would be honey stores. Kind of like today, there's a shop in Harvard Square called Follow the Honey, which is an amazing store. I hope you all check it out if you haven't yet, because it's a honey store. And to see all the different honeys, it's really flower juice from all the different parts of the world is an amazing thing. So originally started that in areas of Turkey and Eastern Europe too. Will travel around with sometimes even a donkey powering a cart that has bees. They sometimes get paid or sometimes pay to use certain farms and properties. So it's not uniquely United States. It's just that I think the scale with which we have grown since post-World War II has been so exponential that it might not be sustainable. It's a question. Yes?
I was fascinated by what you said, that bees and flowers co-evolve. It sounds like a chicken and egg question. How does that work?
This is so fun because a paper just came out a few months ago that was looking at this idea of how this adaptive radiation occurred, something that seemed to have a new niche in the world where there were no flowers and then flowers appeared and the pollinators took notice and together they diversified and ran with it. It seems in the fossil record that there were these proto-flowers, so things that just didn't get noticed, these mutations in trees and plants that were kind of flower-like, but maybe not getting noticed by the wasps and other things that were around at that time. And I think to get to a request from earlier, how bees kind of navigate, they will navigate long distances really by the position of the sun and short distances with landmarks for the most part, also with scents and colors and shorter distances too. We don't believe that they can see very much in the dark, but what they do in the dark is they pick up on vibrations. So if the bee is going out to a flower, let's say, okay, going back 100 million years, the wasp found a proto-flower, and then over time, the wasps diversified into bees, really, the flowers diversified into all the angiosperms, and they developed these communication systems, such as the waggle dance. And this is Nobel Prize winning research. This is like, I tell my students, like, this is big stuff, right? Bees, Nobel, it's huge. So Carl von Frisch won the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine for his work with the waggle dance. And this is where one bee will find a flower patch and then come back to the beehive. So bees go back home, and she will dance in the dark to communicate to the other bees what she's just found. And she's really communicating three things here. So the direction of the flower patch is her dance in relation to the sun's position. It will say, take a right 40 degrees and go that way, or a left, or something. And then it will also say the distance from the hive. So go for 40 feet, to 40 degrees to the right, because the position of her dance in relation to the sun, and then the length of a certain run part of her dance, which I'm about to demonstrate to you, tells how far the bee should fly. And then also how fast, how vigorous her dance is a relation to the quality of the floral patch. The flower, if the food is really good, she's going to dance very hard. If it's only good, you know, she'll take her time. So it's called the waggle dance. It's kind of like a figure 8. And it's really when the bees kind of move their tail ends, so like the bee butt kind of shakes. We do this in schools all the time. It's so fun with kids. We teach them how to be pollinators. And this is like cool stuff here, really where our food comes from. So, okay, let's say you're a flower, okay? And like it's a really good flower here, like a red flower. You can't see it as red, so maybe let's see it as like, you know, blue. Here's the flower, so I'm going to angle my waggle dance. If the sun is right here, I will angle my dance come towards you, and I will walk and waggle towards you. So I'm going to take a few steps, that's kind of distance, and then I'll waggle back and kind of go back in a figure 8, and then I will repeat just towards you. And then I waggle back like in a figure 8, and I just keep and it's kind of the mystery to students, like, wow, they dance to communicate, but they can't even see each other. And they dance on top of other bees. So it's quite amazing, and that's really how they do this in the dark. Another thing they communicate to, in addition to the floral patch, is a nice new nesting site. And that's a lot of work that was done by Tom Seeley and his colleagues at Cornell. And Tom Seeley is my academic grandfather. So my PhD advisor worked under Tom Seeley. So a little bit of a relationship there. Yeah.
Do the bees make a noise when they're doing this dance?
You know, it's funny, they do make a bit of a buzzing noise, but the noise associated with this dance can be called piping, and it's when the other bees tell her to shut up. They go, we get it. You got it. You don't have to keep going. So that's the noise associated. Sometimes you can hear kind of a little beep. I can't do it very well. But yeah, when they get the point, we got it. You can hang out now. It's quite fun. Yeah, so honeybees are not native to the Americas. What are native to the Americas are the 4,000 or so other bee species that are not very well understood. The crops that we use, honeybees to pollinate, many of them are not native to the Americas either. So much of that was brought over by settlers. In the 1600s, we brought over honeybees. Some of them Italian, perhaps at the time, but I'll have to kind of go back and see if we know what strains of honeybees were brought over. Native Americans were said to have called them the white man's fly because honeybees can swarm, as we have all seen, ahead of where people are in settling. So if honeybees would come ahead of the settlers, the Native Americans would say, uh-oh, like that's different, that shouldn't be here, and it's a fly, a white man's fly, the white men are coming. So that's kind of the lore associated with the bringing of honeybees, European honeybees, to the Americas. And along with much of their crops. So it's a common, very docile, good pollinator used in Europe, and now it's also used here. Because everybody else is doing it. The big question is, should we be using Italian honeybees? Should we use Russians or other buckfast, Canadian bees? It's a really important conversation to have. So it's something we still wonder about today. But Italians remain the most common honeybee kept by beekeepers in Massachusetts today. Yeah.
So can other bee species make honey as well, or is there any honeybees that make honey?
Other species do make honey as well. I love this question because it's just in very small amounts. The bees are really making it for themselves, but with honeybees, they're different because their population size in each hive is so large. It's tens of thousands of bees, maybe 80,000 bees per hive. And so they're making this just full-time as a factory, and there's all this extra to go around. With other species of bees and wasps, they do make honey. And one of my grad student, my colleague in grad school, tasted wasp honey. And I was dared to, and I didn't take it. This is play truth or dare, don't do the dare, and you regret it for the rest of your life. I really wonder what wasp honey tastes like, you know? So that was Susan Weiner. Ann Madden is also another former Touch grad student, and she is working with breweries to create wasp honey beer. So there are also economic implications to those products. The problem is just that they're not made in much quantity. And also now with Ann Madden's work, it actually wasn't the honey there, it was a yeast found in wasp nests. And they're using that yeast to ferment beer. Yeah, so that's a correction there. But there is still honey in other species. And also to address the life cycle question, then we'll get to your question here too. So with the life cycle of bees, you know, the queen lays an egg, and then it's an egg for about 3 days. An egg of a honeybee looks like a grain of rice. It's one little egg in a cell in a wax comb, that hexagonal shape. And when beekeepers are going through a beehive, we pull up the frames. Each box tends to have 8 or 10 frames in it. You pull up the frame and just look at everything that's happening. And to train each of you on how to be an organic beekeeper right now, you want to know how? I'll give you a certificate one day. If you see something gross, however you want to define gross or weird, just get rid of it and replace it with something new if you have it, or don't replace it with anything at all. Just get it out of there. And stay diligent, because the bees can help themselves. It's kind of like surgery, but on a beehive. You know, you just want to remove whatever's not supposed to be there and then let it heal, you know, so the bees can kind of heal themselves. So it starts with an egg for about 3 days, and then it's a larva, a little worm-like grub creature, for about a week or so, and then it develops into a pupa, which is that cocoon type stage. And it's in that form for about 2 weeks or so. And so you kind of have about a month developing, and then about a month as an adult. So he closes or emerges as a fully grown adult. So a bee, once it's born, doesn't get any larger in size than that time. And it's an adult bee, at least with female workers, for 4 weeks. The first week or so is about cleaning. They're called nurse bees. Can you imagine human kids, if you have a child and she gets back to cleaning? Like, it would be amazing. So that's one way that these are not like people. Young bees do the housekeeping, the nursing. And then the teenager bees are called the guard bees. So those are the bees that are about 2 weeks old or so, and they'll guard the front entrance. They make sure that only their relative bees are coming in. Sometimes they'll let non-related bees enter if they have food. Okay, you can come in. We'll take that food. And then the older bees, the 3 to 4 week old bees, are the foragers. Those are the ones that are going out to the flowers to get the food, the pollen and the nectar. Those are the ones that you see. If you see a bee out in a flower, you know a couple things. That's a female, because it's doing something, right? And that's an older bee. She's about 3 to 4 weeks old. Those bees are the ones that tend to die over time after the 4 weeks because their wings get tattered. It's exhausting work. They're flying so much, and they tend to die away from the hive. They're so hygienic and clean that it's just kind of part of their nature. If a honeybee dies in the hive, they tend to be dragged out and just kind of, not buried, but kind of put to pasture in a way. So that's the general life cycle of a worker bee. Male bees develop in the same way, but they only have the function to have sex, and they die in that process. Queen honeybees, the last thing I'll add about this life cycle is that the queen bee mates right after she is an adult. She goes on up to 3 different mating flights, so she mates in the air. She mates with an obscene number of males. It is a wonder in the natural world. My animal behavior and evolution students love talking about this stuff. So it's called hyperpolyandry. So polyandry is multiple males. Hyper is a lot of multiple males. I thought that my paper with colleagues from Tufts had the highest number of patrolines, as we call it. Moripovich might call it baby daddies, he said. That's not appropriate at all. But thinking about genetic diversity in the hive, one queen, 29 different genetic lines we found in a natural beehive at the Tufts Vet School out in Grafton, Massachusetts. That number was blown out of the water by Heather Matillo, who's at Wellesley College, and her researchers who found one that was 49 patrolines. And the queen stores the sperm for her whole life, for years. So it's an amazing system. Yes, so if a queen is artificially inseminated, which totally happens, that number they tend to aim for about 12 or so males. And that's a number really thought to be a good amount of genetic diversity for a hive to function properly. If there's inbreeding in honeybees, at least, there can be, they're called genetic misfits. So diploid males and triploid females and things that should be male but are female, and it just gets a little dysfunctional. Because of the roles of males and females, you don't want too many males. Take a couple more questions, and then I'll thank you for your attention.
So what percentage of the hive is actually male?
So according to theory, really, with thinking about W. Hamilton here, we think about 75% of the hive would be females, and about 25% of the hive would be males. So that's the theoretical genetic relatedness. Of the females to the males, think about 3/4 and 1/4. Looking at the functionality of the beehive, we tend to see tens of thousands of workers, so tens of thousands of females, and a few hundred males. But it can vary widely. If there's a problem with the queen, her queen pheromone is weak, other worker bees can start laying unfertilized eggs. So the workers can't mate, but they can lay unfertilized eggs. And with bees, if you remember your genetics from an hour ago, it seemed like a week ago at this point, but unfertilized bee eggs are males. So workers, if they start laying eggs, which is a no-no, they'll be all male. And if the beekeeper goes into his or her hive and you see too many males, there's something that you might want to get a new bee, which you can actually get online or through the phone in a buzzing package for $25 or so. Beekeeping is very fun.
Yeah, well, I guess not. Won't a hive develop its own queen if the queen dies off?
A hive can develop its own queen, which is always a good thing. That's really if the queen has weakened and then the other bees are essentially voting in a way that we need a new one. We're overthrowing the queen. Tom Seeley, again, to plug his book, Honeybee Democracy, goes into some really fun opportunities at this topic. But sometimes the queen dies or she can fly off. I've seen that happen once, which is crazy. And there were 2 kids there and the queen just flew away and the kids were like, is that supposed to happen? I said, I don't know, you know how to handle kids. Nobody knows. Yes?
I just wondered if you read that novel from the bee's perspective.
I have not read that novel yet.
I
I'm looking
can't
forward
remember
to
the
it.
title or the author, but it was informative, I thought.
Yes, yeah, I got a good review in the New York Times, I believe. Yeah, the semester is just winding down, so I'm looking forward to catching up. Yeah. Last question over here?
No, it was, I wondered when you divided that one into 4, but you sort of answered where the queen would come from for the other 3.
Yeah, so that's how to split beehives. Thanks again.